The woman who stepped off the bus in Harlan County had no name worth speaking aloud. She had left it behind in Louisville, along with the bruises on her ribs and the smell of bourbon-soaked motel rooms. The driver looked at her twice before pulling away, as if trying to decide whether she was running from the law or from something worse. She stood on the shoulder of the empty highway, dust settling over her worn leather boots, and watched the taillights vanish into the grey distance. Around her, the Appalachian hills rose like the backs of sleeping animals, dark with pine and scarred with old mining roads. The air smelled of rust and rain that hadn't fallen yet. She had $63 in her purse, a change of clothes in a canvas bag, and no plan beyond disappearing. The man in the diner outside Lexington had told her about this place, a forgotten coal town called Stillwell Hollow, where the company had pulled out in 1954 and left the houses standing empty. "Nobody goes there anymore," he'd said, pouring her coffee with shaking hands. "Not since the accident." She didn't ask what accident. She had learned not to ask questions. The road into the hollow was gravel and clay, rutted deep by trucks that no longer came. She walked for an hour before the first houses appeared, their windows dark as sockets in a skull. Company houses, all identical, white clappered with green shutters, porches sagging under the weight of 20 years' silence. Some had collapsed entirely, their roofs caved in like broken ribs. She chose the one at the end of the row, farthest from the road, where the woods pressed close and the air grew thick with the smell of rotting leaves. The front door was unlocked, swollen with moisture but not yet fallen. Inside, the light came through broken panes in shafts of gold and grey, illuminating a room stripped of everything but dust. There was a table, a chair with 3 legs, and a wood stove crusted with rust. On the mantel above the stove someone had left a photograph in a cracked frame, a family pale and unsmiling, the father in overalls and the mother holding a baby wrapped in white. She turned the photograph face down. That first night, she slept on the floor with her coat as a blanket, listening to the house creak and settle around her. The wind came through the walls like breathing. In the dark she could hear the distant sound of water running somewhere beneath the earth, and she thought of the mines, miles of tunnels carved into the mountain, flooding now, reclaiming what had been stolen. She woke before dawn to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Her heart hammered as she pressed herself against the wall, but the footsteps passed and faded into the woods. When she finally dared to look outside, there was nothing but the empty road and the grey light of morning breaking over the ridge. By the second day, she had swept the floors and boarded up the broken windows with planks scavenged from the neighbouring houses. She found a hand pump in the yard that still brought up water, rust-coloured but drinkable after it ran clear. In one of the abandoned houses, she discovered a cast-iron skillet, a box of nails, and a Bible with half its pages torn out. She was learning the rhythms of the hollow, the silence that lasted from dawn until noon, when the crows began to call, the way the light changed in the afternoon, turning everything amber and strange. The sound of the creek at the bottom of the hill, constant and indifferent. On the third day she found the cellar door. It was hidden beneath a rotted rug in the corner of the kitchen, the wood so warped she almost didn't see the iron ring set into the floor. She pulled it open with both hands, and a smell rose up that made her step back. Not decay, but something older, like earth that had been sealed away from light for a very long time. She found a stub of candle on the windowsill and lit it with a match from the gas station in Lexington. The stairs leading down were narrow and steep, carved into the raw clay. She descended slowly, one hand on the damp wall, the candlelight throwing her shadow huge and trembling against the stone. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a space larger than she expected. Not a root cellar, but a room. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, and on those shelves were jars, hundreds of them, glass mason jars sealed with wax, each one filled with something dark and unidentifiable. She lifted one and held it to the candlelight. Inside, suspended in liquid, was what looked like a bundle of cloth. No, not cloth. Hair. Human hair, dark and fine, wound around something small and pale. She set the jar down carefully, her hands shaking. She moved along the shelves, examining the others. Some contained what looked like teeth. Others held folded papers, yellowed with age. One jar, larger than the rest, contained a child's shoe, and at the far end of the room, set into the wall like an altar, was a wooden crate. She approached it slowly, the candlelight flickering, and saw that the lid was nailed shut. On top of the crate, someone had carved words into the wood with a knife. "They that sow in tears shall reap in joy." She stood there for a long time, staring at those words, feeling the cold rise up through the floor and into her bones. Then she turned and climbed the stairs, her breath coming fast and shallow, and did not look back. That night she lay awake on the floor and listened to the house. She told herself it was the wind, the settling of old wood, the scurrying of mice in the walls. But beneath it all she could hear something else, a sound like humming, low and rhythmic, coming from beneath the floorboards. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the humming followed her into her dreams. Chapter 2. The Weight of Names. She didn't go back down to the cellar for 3 days. Instead, she walked the hollow, mapping its geography of abandonment. There were 23 houses in all, arranged in 2 rows along the gravel road that led nowhere. Most were beyond salvage. Their roofs collapsed and their walls buckled inward. But a few still stood solid enough to enter, and she moved through them like a thief, taking what she needed: blankets, a kerosene lamp, a tin pot with only one dent. In the largest house, the one that must have belonged to the mine foreman, she found a ledger. It was water-damaged and mouse-chewed, but the names were still legible, men's names written in careful script with numbers beside them. Tonnage, she realized, how much coal each man had brought up from the earth. She ran her finger down the list, reading names aloud in the empty room. Harlan Jessup, Ezra Cole, Samuel Pruitt, Luther Gaines. They sounded like hymns or curses. At the bottom of the page, someone had written in different ink, in a shakier hand, "May God forgive us." She closed the ledger and left it where she found it. On the 4th day, a truck came up the road. She heard it from a distance, the growl of an engine laboring up the grade, and her first instinct was to hide. But she forced herself to stay on the porch, hands in her pockets, trying to look like she belonged there. The truck was a Ford, 20 years old, painted a faded blue. It stopped in front of her house, and a man climbed out. He was old, maybe 70, with a face like carved wood, and eyes that looked at her without surprise. "Didn't know anybody was living up here," he said. His voice was quiet, measured. "Just passing through," she said. He nodded, as if that made sense. "You staying in the Pruitt house?" She didn't know the name, but she nodded. "Figured somebody would eventually," he said. He pulled a cloth sack from the truck bed and set it on the porch steps. "Brought you some things: cornmeal, beans, coffee. There's a store down in Harlan, but it's 12 miles. She stared at him. "Why?" "Because nobody should go hungry," he said simply. Then he turned to leave. "Wait," she said. "What happened here?" He stopped, his back to her. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, "Cave-in, 1954. 17 men went down and didn't come back up. Company sealed the mine and left. Most folks moved on, a few stayed, but they're all gone now." "And the Pruitts?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Elias Pruitt was the shift boss," he said finally. "He didn't go down that day, but his boy did. 12 years old, working the cart lines. After they sealed it, Elias. Well, he stayed in that house for 2 years, alone. Then one morning, folks found him in the woods with a rope around his neck." She felt the words settle over her like ash. "His wife?" she asked. "She left before the cave-in," the old man said. "Couldn't take the hollow anymore, too many women losing their men to the mountain." He climbed back into his truck, and she watched him drive away, the engine's echo fading into the trees. That night, she went back down to the cellar. This time she brought the kerosene lamp and a hammer she'd found in one of the other houses. She set the lamp on the bottom step and approached the wooden crate at the far end of the room. Up close she could see that the nails were old, hand-forged, driven deep into the wood. She wedged the hammer's claw beneath the lid and pulled. The wood groaned but held. She pulled again, harder, and this time the nails shrieked free. Inside the crate was a leather satchel, cracked and stiff with age. She lifted it carefully and set it on the floor. The buckles were rusted shut and she had to pry them open with the edge of the hammer. When she opened the satchel, papers spilled out, letters, folded and unfolded so many times the creases had begun to tear. She picked up the first one and held it to the light. The handwriting was a woman's, elegant and careful. Elias, I cannot stay in this place any longer. The mountain takes and takes, and you give it everything. I have begged you to leave, to take me and Daniel somewhere the earth does not swallow men whole. But you will not listen. You say the mine is all we have, that it feeds us, that it is our duty. But what good is duty when it leaves me a widow? I am leaving, Elias. I cannot watch you die. Forgive me, or do not, I am already gone. She set the letter down and picked up another. This one was written in a different hand, rougher, barely legible. Pa, Mama left last night. I heard you crying in the kitchen. I am not afraid of the mine. I will work harder. I will make her proud. I will make you proud. Do not be sad. Daniel. She read through the rest of the letters, one by one. They were all addressed to Elias, written by his wife over the course of 3 years. Please to leave the hollow, to take the boy somewhere safe. Descriptions of sleepless nights, of dreams where the mountain cracked open and swallowed her whole. Promises that if he would only listen, she would forgive him everything. But he had not listened, and the boy had died. At the bottom of the satchel, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small notebook. She opened it and found columns of names, the same names from the foreman's ledger, but with something else written beside them. Dates and amounts. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. Then slowly the truth settled over her like a weight she could not lift. Elias Prewitt had been paying the families of the dead miners. Small amounts, scraped together from his own wages. Not much, but enough to keep them from starving. Enough to ease the guilt of being the shift boss who had sent those men into the mountain on the day it collapsed. She closed the notebook and sat in the dark, the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Around her, the jars gleamed like eyes. She understood now. The hair, the teeth, the scraps of cloth. Elias had collected them from the families, tokens of the men who had died. Not as trophies, but as penance. He had built this cellar into a shrine, a place to remember what could not be undone. She climbed the stairs and closed the door behind her. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. She sat on the porch and watched the trees sway in the dark, thinking about all the ways a person could carry the dead. Chapter 3. The Sound Beneath the Earth. The old man came back a week later. She was splitting firewood in the yard when his truck appeared, rattling up the road with the patient determination of something that refused to die. He climbed out slowly, favoring his left leg, and stood watching her work. "You're still here," he said. She drove the axe into the stump and wiped her hands on her jeans. "Nowhere else to be." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Name's Virgil," he said. "Virgil Decker. Used to work the Stillwell mine back before." "Before the cave-in," she said. "That's right." He reached into his truck and pulled out a burlap sack. "Brought you some more supplies and something else." He handed her a small bundle wrapped in newspaper. "Keys to the church. It's up the hill, past the cemetery. Still got a good roof if you need shelter from a storm." She took the keys, feeling their weight in her palm. "Why are you helping me?" Virgil looked at her for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to run," he said quietly. "And I know what it's like to need a place where nobody asks questions." She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she asked, "Did you know Elias Prewitt?" His expression darkened. "I did," he said. "Good man. Too good for this place." He blamed himself for what happened, even though it wasn't his fault. The company knew those tunnels were unstable. They just didn't care. "He built something in the cellar," she said. "A kind of memorial." Virgil's jaw tightened. "I heard about that. Never went down there myself. Some things are best left alone." "There were letters," she said, "from his wife and a notebook with names and money." Virgil was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Elias gave what he could to the families, broke himself trying to make it right. But you can't buy back the dead. You can't pay your way out of guilt." "What happened to the families?" she asked. "Most left," Virgil said. "The company offered them pittance, and they took it because they had no choice. A few stayed stubborn or stupid, but the hollow was dying even before the cave-in. Once the mine closed, there was no reason to stay. He turned to leave, then paused. "You hear anything strange at night?" he asked. She felt a chill run down her spine. "Like what?" "Humming," Virgil said. "Or singing. Some folks who lived here after the cave-in, they said they could hear it. Said it came from the mine, like the mountain was breathing." She thought of the sound she had heard beneath the floorboards, low and rhythmic like a heartbeat. "What is it?" she asked. "Water," Virgil said. "The tunnels flooded after they sealed them. Sometimes the pressure builds, and you can hear it moving through the rock. That's all it is, just water." But he didn't sound convinced. After he left, she walked up the hill to find the church. The cemetery came first, a small plot surrounded by a rusted iron fence. Most of the graves were marked with simple wooden crosses, the names carved by hand. She found Elias Prewitt's grave near the back, beneath a willow tree. The headstone was plain granite, inscribed with only his name and the years he lived. Next to his grave was a smaller one, Daniel Prewitt, beloved son. No dates, just the words, "Gone to the mountain." She stood there until the light began to fade, then continued up the hill. The church was small and white, with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior was simple, wooden pews, a pulpit and a cross mounted on the wall. Dust motes drifted in the last rays of sunlight streaming through the windows. On the pulpit, someone had left a Bible open to a page marked with a dried flower. She walked to the front and looked down at the verse. It was from Psalms. "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." She closed the Bible and sat in the front pew, letting the silence settle around her. For the first time since arriving in the hollow, she felt something close to peace. But that night the humming returned. It was louder this time, impossible to ignore. She lay on her makeshift bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to convince herself it was just water moving through the flooded mine. But it didn't sound like water. It sounded like voices. She rose and lit the kerosene lamp, then descended into the cellar. The jars gleamed in the lamplight, their contents suspended in amber liquid. She moved to the far wall and pressed her ear against the stone. The sound was coming from beyond the wall. Not from the cellar, but from deeper, from the earth itself. She stepped back and examined the wall more closely. At first, it looked solid, but then she noticed a seam running vertically along one side. She ran her fingers along it and felt a draft of cold air. There was a door here, hidden but not sealed. She found a crowbar in the corner and worked the blade into the seam. The stone shifted, grinding against stone, and then suddenly gave way. The door swung open on rusted hinges, revealing a tunnel carved into the raw earth. The humming grew louder, and now she could make out words, not English, not quite, but something older, half-sung, half-whispered. She took the lamp and stepped into the tunnel. Chapter 4. The Testimony of Stone. The tunnel sloped downward, narrow and rough-hewn, the walls slick with moisture. She had to stoop as she walked, one hand on the damp stone, the lamp casting wild shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The air grew colder with each step, and the humming grew clearer. After 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a chamber. She stopped at the threshold, raising the lamp. The chamber was larger than the cellar above, carved directly into the limestone bedrock. And it was full. Not with water, as she had expected, with objects. Arranged in careful rows along the walls were miners' helmets, lunch pails, tools, boots. Each item was positioned deliberately, almost reverently, as if someone had laid them out for inspection. In the center of the chamber stood a wooden table, and on that table were 17 photographs. She approached slowly, her breath misting in the cold air. The photographs were of men, young and old, clean-shaven and bearded, all wearing the same expression of grim determination. Beneath each photograph was a name, written in ink on a scrap of paper. Harlan Jessup, Ezra Cole, Samuel Prewitt, Luther Gaines. She recognized them from the ledger. These were the men who had died in the cave-in, and at the far end of the table, smaller than the others, was a photograph of a boy, Daniel Prewitt, 12 years old with his father's eyes. She stood there for a long time, looking at their faces. Then she heard it again, the humming, louder now, echoing off the stone walls. It was coming from deeper in the chamber. She turned and saw at the far end another opening, not a tunnel this time, but a shaft. She walked to the edge and looked down. The shaft dropped into darkness, but she could see water gleaming 30 feet below, and rising from that water was the sound. Not humming, she realized now, but the slow movement of air through flooded tunnels. The mine breathing. But there was something else. On the wall beside the shaft, someone had carved words into the stone. She held the lamp close and read them. Here lie 17 souls, taken by the mountain, betrayed by greed. May their names be remembered when all else is forgotten. May their sacrifice not be in vain. Elias Prewitt, 1954. She felt her knees weaken. She sank to the stone floor, the lamp trembling in her hand. Elias had built this, not just the cellar, but this entire chamber. He had carved it out of the mountain himself, night after night for 2 years, a memorial to the men he believed he had failed, a testimony in stone, hidden where no one would ever find it. She wept then, for the first time since leaving Louisville, not for herself but for Elias, for Daniel, for all the men whose names were carved into this mountain, for the weight of guilt that could not be lifted, only carried until it crushed you. When she finally climbed back up to the house, dawn was breaking over the ridge. She stood on the porch and watched the light spread across the hollow, turning the abandoned houses from grey to gold, and she made a decision. Over the next 3 weeks, she worked. She cleared the cemetery, pulling weeds and righting fallen crosses. She repaired the church, replacing broken windows and patching the roof. She cleaned the chamber beneath the house, dusting each photograph, polishing each helmet until it gleamed. Virgil came by once a week, bringing supplies, never asking questions. But one day, as he was leaving, she stopped him. "I need you to do something," she said. He turned, waiting. "Tell people about this place, Ka," she said. "About Elias and what he built. About the men who died. Make sure they're remembered." Virgil studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I will," he said, and he kept his word. Within a month, people began to come. Not many at first, just a few relatives of the dead miners, curious and hesitant. She showed them the chamber, let them stand in silence before the photographs of their fathers and grandfathers. Word spread. A journalist came from Lexington and wrote a story. Then a historian, who catalogued the artifacts and recorded the names. The State Historical Society placed a marker at the entrance to the hollow, commemorating the Stillwell mine disaster and the memorial Elias Prewitt had built. She stayed, not as a caretaker exactly, but as a witness. She lived in the Prewitt house, tended the cemetery, opened the chamber for visitors who made the long drive up the hollow. She learned the names of all 17 men, and she spoke them aloud each morning like a prayer. Years passed. Her hair turned grey, her hands grew rough from work. People stopped asking where she came from, stopped wondering who she had been before. She became part of the hollow, as permanent as the stone. And at night, when the humming rose from beneath the earth, she no longer feared it. She understood it now, not as a haunting, but as a reminder. The mountain remembered. The water carried the voices of the dead, not in sorrow, but in witness. She had come to this place with no name worth speaking. She had been running from shame, from violence, from a life that had hollowed her out and left her empty. But in Stillwell Hollow, among the forgotten and the dead, she had found what she didn't know she was searching for. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but purpose, and in the end that was enough.